I'm really excited about introducing Michael, who all of you, of course, know super well by now. And Michael and I have known each other for about 10 years, but it's only been recently, with the training program that we've really gotten more intimate. So Michael's part of the first group that we accepted into training 2 years ago. So of course, all know that Michael and Nina and David are all graduating this weekend. And later on today, I guess at the dinner, we will award them with their certificates. And this is really thrilling. Anyway, I'll say more about that later. For right now, Michael, this is the second year Michael's come to the Asilomar meetings. He did such an amazing job last year, he's going to have a hard time living up to our expectations. But I'm sure he will dazzle us yet again. And the topic of Michael's talk is the apricity of death. And if you don't know what that means, I'm sure Michael will be very happy to explain it to you. So, warm welcome for Michael Montgomery.
It seems ungracious not to take delight in day because it turns so soon tonight. Eternity is always here to stay. It's only you and I who fade away. Artie Lang, life before death. Take a moment to look around this room. We're all going to die. Some of us sooner than others. Don't be presumptuous, as no one knows when their death will come. I saw you taking a sneaky peek at who you thought it might be, but we just don't know. Everyone on this planet today is going to die. You might wonder why we're not all running up and down the aisle screaming, "We're all going to die, we're all going to die," just like in those disaster movies. Perhaps we don't do that because death is such a natural part of life. James Joyce put it so beautifully. They lived and laughed and loved and left. Isn't that beautiful? The Irish understand death. Another reason not to panic is you're in the company of hardcore hedonists. Sorry, I meant existentialists. Don't get those two mixed up, right? Existentialists accept death as an integral part of life. You'll have already heard from Heidegger and his phenomenological analysis, making a distinction between our biological demise and death as a fundamental aspect of our human existence. Our own beloved John Mills describes the ontology of death as universal, hence archetypal, and as such, as we've seen, can be represented visually. Historians have highlighted that early Christian Americans placed much emphasis on the good death, surrounded by family and friends. The idea of death shifted significantly during the Civil War as battlefield casualties denied their families the traditional good death as they lay dying far from home. A new belief was born. In lieu of earthly meeting with families, the dying would see their families intact in heaven. This shift, amid a massive social upheaval, helped mitigate pain and offered a new form of closure. But it also created a more and perhaps egoic idea of the afterlife. Death seems to have vanished from everyday communications, and Western society seems to suppress anything that calls it to mind. It seems conspicuous by its absence. I remember being in Ireland and seeing a hearse with a coffin in the back almost daily. Open coffins were a common reality, with the corpse left relatively unaltered. Death and sacrifice were powerfully mythologized by the traditional secret Republican Irish Army, Irish Republican Army, when volunteers were buried publicly with full paramilitary honours. When considering our attitude towards death, Freud stated, "We showed an unmistakable tendency to put death on one side. To eliminate it from life, we tried to hush it up." He was sceptical that we could really reflect on our own death and that our unconscious believed that in some way we were immortal. If you want to prepare for peace, arm for war. If you want to endure life, prepare yourself for death. There's a heavy price to be paid for this denial of death, as Ernest Becker convincingly argues, as it can be at the centre of many, if not all, neurosis, psychosis, loss of meaning, conflict, and horror and violence. When asked to answer the question, what is death? The words of our beloved Michel de Montaigne immediately come to mind. What do I know? What do I know? He did recommend contemplating on the inevitability of death in order to lead a better life. He brought attention to the value in reading the Stoics, Skeptics, and Epicureans and their insights into how to live while facing our own demise. I certainly cannot think of a more important question to ask than what is death. I remember vividly standing in the kitchen of my family home at 7 years of age thinking, what is the point? I had just come back from a family vacation in peaceful County Wicklow in the south of Ireland. I was back in Belfast and it seemed to be surrounded by death. I thought, if I'm lucky, I'll go to school, get a job, grow old and die. It all seemed so pointless. You may be tempted to judge or even pathologise that child, but when I look back, I just see a being who was very aware of their existence. And of course, there was a context for the deep despair, and that was being born into an armed conflict that was raging. There were bombs and bullets going off every day, and images of the carnage replayed on the evening news, which was mandatory viewing in my home in silence. There was little solace from family and friends, as they were resolute in their Christian faith and seemed to carry on as if everything was normal. You might wonder, how can I be so sure of my age and that memory? Well, it's easy, because it was the year that Star Wars came out. Like Dorothy at the start of The Wizard of Oz, my world changed instantly from a drab black and white militarized zone to a full colour galaxy far, far away. It sparked my imagination, my joy, and it offered me new hope. Now, before Mike has a near panic attack thinking I'm going to talk about science fiction, I should say it wasn't the appeal of lightsabers, starships, and Wookiees, but rather the deep connection with the archetype of the hero's journey. George Lucas, of course, was inspired by the work of Joseph Campbell on archetypes and the monomyth to tell his story. Campbell was also a passionate James Joyce scholar from whom he borrowed the concept of the monomyth. So basically, the Irish wrote Star Wars. This morning, I'd like to share some of my own journey, really what I believe, in fact, is the journey, to answer the question, what is death? Like the average hero, I did not want to be called Adventure, I just wanted to be like everyone else. They seemed pretty confident that no matter how bad the world was, it didn't matter. Because if you believed in the Jesus guy, you would go to heaven where everything would be peachy. This didn't work for me. I just wasn't feeling it, as they say. I so wish I could have. I think it's the fundamental thing that people with faith never understand. I felt confused, out of step, alone, and then I discovered a different voice, a mentor, a guide, and someone who dared to imagine a life with no heaven, no countries to kill or die for, and people living in peace. You can see the appeal to a young person devastated by witnessing religious and political conflict, that seemed so futile, a need to find others who had transcended an ethnocentric view to one of world-centric and beyond. John Lennon and the Beatles offered such freedom and possibilities. They sang of reassurance, letting things be, give peace a chance, war is over, all you need is love, imagine all the people living for the day. I certainly was a dreamer, and I wanted to dream that dream. Even as a youngster, I had a vicarious connection with an expansion of consciousness through their psychedelically influenced music and lyrics. It led me to a fascination with the 60s and the hippies, the summer of love, Haight-Ashbury, and images of Timothy Leary saying, "Turn on, tune in, and drop out." The attraction made no logic sense, but the emotional connection was powerful, as if I'd been there before, perhaps in a past life. I really believed that the hippies and the psychedelic movement were the knowledge holders. Love and peace held a huge draw. So I was temporarily able to escape into fantasy and the call to adventure. I had already adopted what fellow citizens called the steel shutter, a way to compartmentalize the reaction to violence from everyday emotions. But perhaps remarkably, at 10 years of age, and despite all the carnage and killing in the community, there was one event at that point that impacted me more than any other. And that was the assassination of John Lennon. I cried for days. The sanctuary of the peace and love of the Beatles was violated and taken from us all. The world became bigger, more frightening, and more violent than I could ever have imagined. John was killed on the Monday, December 8th, 1980, and by Sunday I was composed but still feeling sad, fueled by the many newspaper reports endeavouring to make sense of the senseless. That Sunday, as was the custom, I attended church with my family, and in my naivety I had an expectation and a need that the young minister would offer some words of solace. But instead, he stood up, and his opening line was, "John Lennon is dead, but Jesus lives." I can still remember how I experienced those words like it was today. I felt so hurt and devastated that someone could be so callous and lacking compassion, placing faith over reality. It severed my association with the church as offering any chance of salvation for my soul. The following year was pivotal in the armed struggle. The Provisional IRA made the decision to embark on a hunger strike to the death, highlighting their demands for prisoners to be granted political status. These prisoners, in theory, were on the other side of the conflict from my family, but their actions changed everything I had come to understand as being true. Even at 10 years of age, my dad's claim that the smell of one of my mother's dinners would have the strikers eating again made me realise that he was no longer a reliable source of information. A child could easily relate to what it must take not to eat for 66 days. When Bobby Sands, the first hunger striker, died, Belfast burned. But the horror was only beginning, as Francis Hughes died 7 days later, Raymond McCreish 9 days after that, until in the space of less than a few months, 10 men were dead. The tension and carnage between each imminent death was indescribable. The inevitability of their slow demise was palpable, as were the deaths of hundreds of people who died outside the prison during these most turbulent times. In all of this, I was distracted from fully considering my own demise by the pain of being aware of others' deaths. I was angry with any God who could watch this suffering take place and not intercede. An armchair theologian like my father would make all sorts of arguments around free will and that this was the result of man, but none of them made a difference. I struggled for years with my relationship to the church before crossing the threshold and stepping out into the wilderness at 16. with no ready-made answers to what death really meant. I did find new meaning and purpose though quickly. I wanted to be a murder detective in the London Metropolitan Police. Of course I did. I left school at 16. I went to a technical college and I prepared for my entrance exams. I travelled to London on the first opportunity that I could get, and then I spent the weekend with about 50 hopeful men from all over the UK. I was the youngest, but I passed everything with the flying colours, except the colour vision test. The pain of rejection was indescribable. I stepped out of the police station on Edgware Road, and literally the experience was like stepping into a world devoid of all meaning and purpose. This was my first experience of death, not a physical death, but of the very fabric of one's being. Oscar Wilde said, "And the wild regrets and the bloody sweats none knew so well as I, for he who lives more lives than one, more deaths than one shall die." People have said to me many times, all your stories end in death, and that is very true, including my own. Death seems to follow me around beyond the reality of the armed conflict, with everyday human tragedy, from diseases to suicides. Far too many tragedies and horror to mention. I like that line in Jerry Maguire, let's not tell each other all our sad stories. Northern Ireland continues to have one of the highest suicide rates in Europe. But I got a job in the Belfast Telegraph, the main local newspaper. My first role was on the front counter taking the classified ads, including the births, deaths and marriage notices, but mainly the death notices. Terrorists would come in to place the notices of their fallen comrades, and widows would defiantly place the death notices in person themselves. If someone was killed, we would be the first to know the details and experience the grief up close and personal. Belfast at that time was so brutal. I knew someone who put a notice in that read, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." He was shot 3 times in the head for that slight. Think happy thoughts. So my adventure, fueled by undeniable circumstances, had begun. I was interested in true sanity, which was the way of being on this earth, despite the destruction, with a sense of clarity and a meaning. In my pursuit of answers to what death is, I followed many threads and clues, including the work of Aleister Crowley and the Western mystic tradition, but much of it remained within the Judeo-Christian cosmology. Through Crowley, I was introduced to an old mystic text called Cloud Upon the Sanctuary by Karl von Eckenhausen. The essence of the book, or rather the esoteric teaching that I took from it, was that there was an inner church. The inspirational message was that the outer church, in the form of rites and rituals and any worldly manifestation, had lost touch with the inner church that retained the meaning and impact of what those rites and rituals truly referred to. So, like the Theosophists, Rosarians, Freemasons and members of the Golden Dawn, we all believed that there were people on the planet who were the knowledge holders of direct truth and the meaning of death. So, with that esoteric knowledge, I went on a quest to find the inner church. It was a precarious journey that took me down many dead ends and generated many adventures. I found many good people, but none of them held the answers that I so desperately sought. Crowley's mentor, Alan Bennett, went to the east to become one of the first Westerners to take the Buddhist robe. So my focus turned to the east, starting with Zen Buddhism as interpreted by Alan Watts, the teachings of Suzuki Roshi, and Trungpa Rinpoche, who was a good friend of Lang's. Ironically, all very West Coast. However, it was only when I began meditating that I started to get a sense that some of the answers that I sought might be much closer than I had imagined. I attempted to meditate regularly, taking months before I had any glimpse of a more settled and calmer mind. As I became more committed, I eventually moved to live and work in a retreat centre in England, where I'd often stayed. Here, I spent many years in intense meditation practice and study. I was integrating my body and mind, developing positive emotion, and beginning the process of spiritual death with the hope of a spiritual rebirth in the form of ordination into an order. Buddhism explains life's unsatisfactoriness and offers a path to overcome it. It teaches that all unconditioned phenomena, including our sense of a fixed, unchanging self, are impermanent and lack a fixed essence. Through acceptance and non-clinging, Buddhism offers freedom, refined meditative states, increased clarity, and a mind that is more creative and less reactive. But Buddhist practice didn't always reach deep issues like toxic shame, attachment-related pathology, and the neurobiological legacy of complex trauma. I soon realised that my aspirations involved some degree of spiritual bypassing, and I needed Western-focused support in the form of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. Recognising intrinsic awareness is one thing, remaining there is another. A fragmented psyche or false persona obstructs seeing through the limited sense of self, challenging the opportunity to experience wholeness. In Eastern approaches, the ego, or limited self, is seen as illusionary and transitory, with the focus more on the higher self or nature of mind. However, without attention to the ego, even the most gifted spiritual teachers can fall prey to an unintegrated or shadow aspect of their psyche. We have seen this time and time again with great teachers with obvious attainment who fall short in their actions. From a Western perspective, the healthy and integrated ego or authentic self is often viewed as the end goal, completely ignoring that it may also be limited and restricted in terms of accessing an unconditioned mind. A healthy, everyday consciousness is seen as something to be aspired to rather than transcended. I needed the contemplative and meditative traditions to wake up, but I also needed the psychotherapeutic to clean up and grow up. So, in Buddhism, as for existential thinkers, death and life are not seen as opposing realities or even separate from one another. There is no such thing as life without the constant presence and reality of death. Death is the key to life. Without an open and confident relationship to death, one cannot live a full and meaningful life. If you know how to die properly, then you can live fully and completely. In this sense, Buddhism is about nothing more or less than learning the practice of dying in order to live in a true and authentic way. So incredibly, nearly 60 years ago, the emerging cultural experiments with LSD converged with the Buddhist knowledge of dying. John Lennon sang in the Beatles song Tomorrow Never Knows, "Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream. It is not dying. It is not dying." The words, or a version of the words, came from an LSD manual, The Psychedelic Experience, written by Timothy Leary, Ralph Metzler, and Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass, all contemporaries of R.D. Laing. They wrote in the manual, symbolically, he must die to his past and to his old ego before he can take his place in the new spiritual life into which he has been initiated. Lennon had credited the stupid book of Leary's for destroying his ego. George Harrison, with whom Lennon did a lot of trips, claimed they might not have needed drugs if they all had met the Maharishi and been introduced to meditation first. The psychedelic experience was described as a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, primarily a funeral liturgy. The Tibetan book was read to the dying to guide them through the process of dying and rebirth. a 49-day journal navigating the trials and tribulations of one's mind and karma. This book is often read to placate the family by reducing their despair and creating positive conditions for the departed. The Psychedelic Experience was published in 1964 and became an instant bestseller, influencing a generation of hippies, artists, and seekers. It is where Leary brought to life the phrase set and setting. At the time, Leary and his colleagues recognized the importance of preparing for an LSD trip in a ritualistic manner. They emphasized the need for the correct psychological and social setting, as well as the right mindset and intentions to ensure a more insightful and positive experience in preparation for death and rebirth. They drew from 3 of the possible 6 bardos, or intermediate states, to guide the seeker from a state of ordinary consciousness to one of ego dissolution, a period of initiation into whatever arises, and then a rebirth or a re-emergence back into everyday life. The hope of a gradually returning to ordinary consciousness, integrating the insights gained and embracing renewal and transformation in our everyday lives. The manual, much like most of Leary's work, stirred considerable controversy. Hunter S. Thompson was particularly critical, lambasting Leary for promoting consciousness expansion while seemingly ignoring life's harsh realities. Thompson was skeptical of the notion that LSD had a spiritual value, but he did acknowledge its potential in helping people let go and reset. Leary's work also had a noticeable self-centered and self-serving aspect, focusing perhaps more on showcasing his own personality rather than demonstrating a dissolved ego. Some argued that the manual led to a sense of dissatisfaction among those who did not experience ego death, with the best outcome being disappointment and the worst being distressingly bad trips. While some individuals did achieve the desired experience, others were left disillusioned and unsettled. Lenson very astutely argued that it was the self-fashioning quality of the LSD experience that the authorities really feared. In other words, the ability to master the ego as opposed to become free of it. I certainly have worked with people for whom the psychedelic experience seems to have supercharged their ego into thinking they are liberated, while at the same time drowning in unintegrated confusion and waves of despair. But Leary and others retained the optimistic belief that LSD could positively affect society and lead to a more peaceful, creative, and enlightened world. While LSD can help people break free from conventional society constraint, it does not contain any inherently politically leaning properties. Although there are dramatic exceptions, I have witnessed psychedelics having little impact on certain personalities. They did nothing but strengthen their inherent violent cores that were already present. I have been in clubs when people in MDMA have taken hammers to their fellow man. More than once. As Boone reminds us, the ego is a most potent configurer of imaginal spaces, and if not confronted directly, will turn the most potent psychedelic experience into a self-serving and deceiving charade. Some Buddhists and spiritual purists balked at the very notion of a psychedelic experience, equating to one that takes years of spiritual training. This contrasted with a new generation of teachers who were more comfortable with being both Buddhists and consciousness hackers using non-Buddhist means. Others were taking the opportunity to urge people to proceed with much caution. I think the truth is somewhere in between. The medicine is powerful and needs to be respected. A distinction needs to be made between using a chemical as a key, a conduit, or microscope to a spiritual experience that can be cultivated through meditation and reflection, and the ongoing use of drugs only as an end in itself. George Harrison, Ram Dass, and Alan Watts were early adapters to an expanded consciousness beyond the need for psychedelics. When you get the message, hang up the phone. Leary, Metzler, and Ram Dass all had interesting and noteworthy encounters with Lang. They were particularly taken by his article, Transcendental Experience, Religion and Psychosis. And in many ways, he was probably reductively seen as the UK representative of the acid-fueled counterculture. Lang applied Leary's language of set and setting to propose that if both were significantly altered from the conventional medical context, then the entire experience of psychosis could be so transformed that the individual no longer be regarded as psychotic at all. Although deeply critical of the arrogance of Leary and Ram Dass' missionary approach to turn on the whole population, Lang was a pioneer of the therapeutic use of LSD, and he was able to work with it legally before it was criminalized. He also created some synergy with their work and his appreciation of ego death. True sanity entails in one way or another the dissolution of the normal ego. That false self competently adjusted to our alienated social reality. The emergence of the inner archetypal mediators of divine power, and through this death and rebirth, and the eventual re-establishment of a new kind of ego functioning, the ego now being the servant of the divine, no longer its betrayer. Lonnie Lang, boom, mic drop. Despite the carnage they caused and their rank mirroring of a misreading of Buddhism, I believe that Leary and crew were onto something fundamental in terms of calling out the ego. So, in a fascinating set, well, it's fascinating to me, in a fascinating set of circumstances, I sought the knowledge holders from the same ancient tradition as that of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Navigating different schools and sects of Buddhism was an arduous and lonely quest. Like psychoanalysis, I believed esoteric or higher teachings were only accessible through oral transmission. In addition to my Mahayana teachers, I eventually found teachings and teachers who answered my connections and connected me with the inner church. Through the Nyingma Pa school of Vajrayana Buddhism, I discovered Dzogchen, the direct teachings on the nature of mind. My desire for a far-off nirvana was replaced by the belief that insights could transform one's life experience in this lifetime. The secrets of the inner church have been with me all along, unrecognized. It's worth giving a little bit of context to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which I believe holds all the answers to many of our questions. The version Timothy Leary used was first published in English in 1927, the year Lang was born, and significantly impacted the Western understanding of Eastern spirituality. It was compiled by an American anthropologist, Walter Evans Wentz, who used a translation by a Tibetan Kazai Dawa Sampa. Influenced by W.B. Yeats, his Irish mother, and Celtic mythology, Evans Wentz published a book which became one of the most widely read spiritual texts, bringing Tibetan spiritual wisdom to the Western world. He died in 1965 on July the 17th, the start of this retreat. There are no accidents. The Bardo Thodrol, or the Great Liberation by Hearing in the Intermediate States, is part of a larger cycle of texts hidden by Guru Padmasambhava in the 8th or 9th century and was revealed in the 14th century by Karma Lingpa. Evans Wentz, influenced by Theosophy and Vedanta, made parallels with the occult sciences and named it the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a bit like the Egyptian Book of the Dead. This title, initially a misinterpretation, was later embraced by Tibetans. Tibet was seen as yielding a spiritual potency with lost esoteric wisdom, in part due to geographical inaccessibility and the fact that it had never come under European control. The book was published between the world wars when spiritualism and material mediums were in demand. It provided both fascination and comfort by offering solace to grieving relatives and suggesting that death was an opportunity for enlightenment and not the final destination. Despite misinterpretations, the book opened the way for pioneers and lamas and brought attention to Tibetan spiritual potency. Evan Wendt's own theosophy and Hindu lens led to an interpretation that conflated primordial awareness that we can all recognize with the Vedanta's cosmic mind, a hypothetical metaphysical entity. Yet his work contributed significantly to bringing these teachings to the world. All four of his books are entering their second century in reprinting. In 75, Trungpa Rinpoche, with the help of Fremantle and Thurman, corrected many of the nuanced translation issues. The first complete translation of the Bardo Thodrol was published in 2005. The new translation emphasizes that the dissolution of the coarse forms of consciousness into inner radiance and its re-emergence occur naturally at the time of death. According to Buddhist tradition, this is very important, these experiential processes, mirroring dying and rebirth, can also be achieved in the waking state. The teachings in the Bardo Thodrol addresses life before death, emphasizing that connecting with an experience beyond a fixed ego or unchanging sense of self opens us to the unconfined, aware, luminous nature of mind. We experience cycles of death and rebirth in every moment, highlighting the intermediate state or gap before thought arises. Put simply, the complete teachings of the Bardo Thodrol are about life before death as much as dying. This cycle of death and rebirth occurs in every moment, from death states to waking states, wild thoughts and mood shifts. Just think of all the births and deaths you've experienced in this week alone. Bardo means the immediate state or the gap. When we reflect deeply on our minds, we can see that before a thought arises, there is a gap. In Dzogchen, this gap is called Rigpa, which signifies the direct knowledge of the ground or the nature of mind. Rigpa represents an intrinsic awareness that is ever present and unchanging, beyond the fluctuations of fleeting thoughts and emotions. It is the fundamental nature of mind, characterized by pure presence and clarity that allows us to recognize the true essence of our being. From the perspective of Dzogchen, there is no separation between subject and object. The dualistic distinctions we usually perceive in our everyday experience are illusions. In Rigpa, one recognizes the inseparability of mind and phenomena, seeing all experiences as spontaneous expressions of the primordial ground. This realization transcends ordinary perception, revealing complete openness and freedom, where the mind is naturally luminous and self-arising. This profound recognition is not merely an intellectual understanding, but a direct experiential awareness that transforms one's perception of reality and therefore death. In the tradition, the actual pointing out of the nature of mind is conducted by the Lama or the Rinpoche to the student. Ludwig Wittgenstein famously said, "What we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence." While words are limited and should be used with caution, one could equate the experience with someone holding up a mirror so you can finally recognize your true face. Wittgenstein also said, if we take eternity to mean not everlasting temporal duration, but a point without time, then eternal life belongs to those who live in the present. Oscar Wilde said, yes, death must be so beautiful. To live in the soft brown earth with the grasses waving through one's head and listen to silence. To have no yesterday and no tomorrow, to forget time, to forgive life, to be at peace. Charles Bukowski wrote, you have to die a few times before you can really live. I have had multiple near-death experiences, several death experiences and ego-death experiences, and the peace and solace that I experienced were not having a sense of an afterlife, but rather there was nothing to be feared in my own demise. My own letting go of body and ordinary consciousness. Montaigne described death as the greatest task and his own near-death experience as the sweetest thing. I think I would have absolute peace if I believed that this was it. As Lang said at the beginning, eternity is always here to stay. It's only you and I who fade away. I am, as an existentialist, uncertain about rebirth after death. The reason I cannot let go of the idea completely is primarily because the same teachers who introduced me to the nature of mind make a convincing case in some considerable technical detail of how our consciousness continues after our demise. The Tibetan Book of the Dead urges the practitioner to train in recognizing the clear white light or luminosity at the point of death, so that we can transcend, if there is one, this cycle of rebirth. But for many, this chance is missed, as our ego clinging necessitates a familiar form. Rather than the unconfined spaciousness of mind, we grab. The Buddha said, monks, this mind is inherently luminous, but it is obscured by temporary defilements. This suggests that the mind in its natural state is pure and radiant, but it becomes obscured by various defilements that are not intrinsic to it, which is the idea common to many mystic and contemplative traditions. William Blake noted, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern. Lang said, one thing that is certain is death. What death is, however, seems to me an essentially baffling mystery. I believe the Bardo Thodrol provides vivid and practical guidance on the process of dying, very much supported by temporary, cutting-edge palliative care experience. It describes the biological dissolution of the 6 elements that constitute the human body, detailing the gradual breakdown of our physical and mental components. Each stage is described with physical signs, sensory experiences, and mental phenomena as the elements of earth, water, fire, air, and space, along with everyday consciousness, gradually subside. It describes the opportunity of the clear light, or recognizing complete openness and luminosity, as the instant path to liberation and the cessation of the cycle of rebirth. If this opportunity is missed, it provides further guidance on what awareness may encounter in the form of wrathful and peaceful energy. We are the music makers and the dreamers of dreams, Oshamasu. The Tibetans say, in life you make the mind, but in death the mind makes you. It confronts the notion that consciousness is limited to the body. It confronts the notion that consciousness is limited to the body, as energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. Collectively, it challenges Freud's assertion that we cannot imagine our own death, and speaks to his own admission to Biswanger. Yes, the spirit is everything. Mankind has always known that it possesses spirit. I had to show that there were also instincts. Lang describes spending an inordinate amount of time pondering the experience of his demise and what it would be like if he was compos mentis as he took his last breath. Despite his claims of spiritual attainment as a stream entrant, Lang surprisingly doesn't seem to have come to any firm conclusions. Given his keen interest in yoga, Buddhism and meditation, it would have been fascinating to learn what he thought of the Bardo Thodrol. There is much of Leary's work that I still respect and am indebted to. His focus on set and setting remains a central idea to all credible psychedelic therapy. However, when I reflect back, I think I would have been more at home on the bus with Ken Casey and the Merry Pranksters rather than Millbrook. Not taking any of it too seriously and letting my creativity flow always seemed more appealing than following the discipline of the high priest. The essence of the Bardo Thodrol, the essence of resting in the nature of mind, or recognizing our intrinsic awareness, is that the setting eventually becomes incidental. Thoughts self-liberate, and arguably at the point of death, we can self-liberate. Rather than wait to test the theory, you can work towards the deathless state today, which is a concept that often appears in philosophical, spiritual, and mystical traditions. It typically refers to a state of being beyond death or transcending death altogether. Although I've borrowed heavily from Buddhism, the whole idea of birth and rebirth is enshrined in Campbell's monomyth of the hero's journey. It crosses cultures, continents, and centuries. James Joyce discussed the word metempsychosis in Ulysses to refer to the transmigration of the soul or reincarnation. It is often forgotten that the Celts and Druids held and taught these beliefs, as did some of the early Christians. But of course, Buddhists don't believe in a soul as such, as rebirth refers more to a continuation based on karma and conditioned co-production. This being that becomes from the arising of this that arises, this not being that does not become from the ceasing of that that ceases. There is something fundamental about the opportunity for death and rebirth in this life. Joan Halifax captures the potential of this lived experience of death as simply a transformation into another state of being. She quotes, "A man who dies before he dies does not die when he dies." When collaborating with Stan Groff, Halifax distilled the experiences of many of their research participants as this profound encounter with annihilation, this feeling of loss of self, loss of ego, in fact was the way to move into a life of selflessness, a way of being, of living in the here and now, taking each day as it comes. At its most basic, the outcome of the deathless state is followed by rebirth. For many, it is a newfound openness and selflessness that is often followed by the desire to help others. That was certainly my motivation for my eventual training in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. Sogyal Rinpoche said, "Through recognizing and realizing the empty essence, instead of being selfish and self-centered, one feels open and free." Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. Pema Chodron. The nature of mind is accessible and immediate to us all. but it cannot be recognized by intellectual striving or deduction. This is interesting given what we said about hope. Trungpa Rinpoche proposed that it was the intensity of our hopelessness that determines if we leap into direct recognition or need a gradual transformation. In Vajrayana, one practices with the attitude that the result is already accomplished, wearing out the hope of success and fear of failure. The conviction overcomes spiritual materialism, seeing enlightenment not as a prize but as a continual rediscovery of our ever-present Buddha nature. So, in my repositioning of the Bardo Thodrol as a potential manual for living, a manual for life before death that helps us understand the relationship of consciousness to the mind, have I somewhat deflected from the burning question of what happens when we die? Well, I reiterate, I believe that it is possible to experience a glimpse of the deathless state in this lifetime, and as such, it will reduce all fear and uncertainty about the dying process. Leary said, trust your divinity, trust your brain, trust your companions. Whenever in doubt, turn off your mind, relax, float downstream. The title of this talk was The Apricity of Death. Apricity is a rare English word that means the warmth of the winter sun. It captures the reassuring and often unexpected feeling of the sun's rays, providing warmth during the colder winter months. Lang said, we can be sure of death's utility whatever we've accomplished of futility. As we reflect on the profound teachings of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and indeed the existential canon, let us consider the apricity of death. Just as the sun's warmth brings comfort in the depths of winter, so too can the contemplation of death bring a deeper understanding and appreciation of life. By allowing ourselves to experience the apricity of death, we can find solace and strength, transforming our fears into a source of inner warmth, clarity, and selflessness. Embracing this perspective, we can live more fully while recognizing the beauty and impermanence of our existence. Do not stand by my grave and weep. I am not there. I am the thousand winds that blow. I am the diamond glints in snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. As you wake with morning's hush, I am the swift upflinging rush of quiet birds encircling flight. I am the day transcending night. Do not stand by my grave and cry, I am not there, I did not die.
Thank you, Michael. That was really beautiful. If I could hear you recite the phone book, it would be beautiful too. Well, why don't we open it up? Questions, comments to this remarkable talk.
Just so full.
Just taking it a second.
I'm just wondering if in working on this talk, if it shifted or changed anything in your own relationship with death.
I think it was a very unsettling process. You know, my father's 95, my mother's 90, she's declining into Alzheimer's, so it's a lot of sort of family preparing for loss, and not really, it brought more a lot of memories, you know, of horror that came back, but in terms of where I was, pretty the same really. But it was challenging. I think it was challenging for us all to get into that space.
So one more thing I just want to say I notice all these incredible thinkers are men. You know, you mentioned Pema Chodron, but immediately I thought of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross
Yeah.
and her 5 stages of grief, and I thought, oh my God, we didn't mention her at all.
Yeah.
And her relationship to death is so practical, almost, you know. Anyhow, because it's interesting to me that women seem to be less, what would you call it, exposed or.
Well, she was very much involved. Well, she, really inspired Stan Groff's work. Joan Halifax. The last poem was by a woman, and but yeah, I mean, I think she still has worth, and her work's developing all the time with other people. So, yeah, good point.
Yeah, those stages they keep tinkering with, don't they? They're not set in stone anymore. Because it's not just about death, about loss.
Yeah.
Yeah, about grief.
Yeah.
Right.
I was listening to you talking like I was kind of in a state of reverie, almost walking in a sort of forest full of fog at the beginning when you were talking about your childhood and when you were 7. And it was very, to me, it came very kind of a bit powdery and grey. Not in a bad way or in a judgmental way at all, just as a quality of, maybe even the way in which we remember stuff from our childhood, which is a bit pixelated. And then you mentioned Dorothy, Star Wars and colors, galaxies. So some color came in, and I was, with you, following what you were saying, and sometimes just going somewhere else, and yeah, it was beautiful. It was really beautiful. And what's the word? Apricity? Apricity. That's a fantastic word to add. And that sense of the sun in the cold months doesn't bring much color, but it brings sort of a lucidity of vision.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like the popping color of the summer or the spring, but it's that sense of, oh, something is brewing underneath and still.
An embodiment, because when you feel it, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
there's like a connection.
Yeah.
It's like surprise. You feel it.
Yeah. Well, it's still there, even if you cannot see it. So magical. Thank you.
It was really beautiful, and as you're saying, it was so full. Like, a lot of things are running through my mind that I'd like to say, but every time that thought comes to my mind, I just think it would take away from the incredible space you created. So I might talk later to you about things. It was so profound.
Just to make a side note, just serendipity really, that it was at exactly this place in 2017 where we had altered states discussion, and we had the great Ralph Metzler here.
I was thinking,
And so it wasn't in this room.
No, but
It was, I think it was
here,
in a Triton or something.
I kept picturing him.
He died not long after.
Yeah, yeah.
He
We were
was
really
around
lucky.
for another couple of years, I think.
Yeah.
Did you know that?
No.
Ralph Metzger.
You
was,
did?
He was with us at Asilomar.
Yeah.
And he lived local. He was local in San Rafael.
I know, we would go to lunch with him.
And he gave a talk here, and was quite involved.
You lying very well.
And Timothy Leary.
Yeah, all these people that you lost, Michael. Goodness, it's a lot to carry.
And what I think First off, it was lovely to hear this intelligent, well-researched chronology of the 60s and 70s, and that was just incredible. And it was so profound to hear from you about growing up in that. You know, just amazing, and what it did to you. I also have a story of leaving the church because of what the preacher said about John Lennon. I'll tell you that later. I've never heard anybody say that before. It was so great.
You pretty much grew up in a war zone.
Yeah, I mean, it's, urban conflict. Life just goes on.
It was a war.
It's life and death every day.
Every day. You kill one of ours, tomorrow we kill you. It was that type of tit for tat. It's the thing that freaks me out about America. If you get into tit for tat, it's all over.
Yeah.
You're talking 2-3 generations. So every time something terrible happens, you're, oh God, please don't do retaliation. It's a cycle of violence.
It's what we're living in. I mean, that's what I was very aware of. We're like at the beginning of the same thing.
Yeah.
So
And it's religious wars.
We don't know that.
Let's hope not.
We don't know
Okay,
that.
sorry. I take it back.
We don't know.
No, maybe not. I don't know.
We don't know that we're at the beginning of
It's happening.
But that's the
Okay, maybe
future.
I'm not nihilistic. We'll take that back.
So, one of the things that's always sort of struck me about you is your sort of intrinsic talent for sort of mediating, for, again, rather than tit for tat, taking alternative perspectives and trying to find not necessarily middle ground, but some way for them to appreciate each other's perspectives. And I sort of heard reflections of that in your talk and sort of your search for, is it this, is it that? And so I wonder if you could speak a bit about how all of your experiences have, as you feel it, have contributed to your talent, your gift, I would say, in taking a role often as a mediator.
Well, that's a really hard question. Can you say a bit more?
I think often I've seen you step in when there's sort of difference of opinions or that feels stuck.
Oh, yes.
And you're able to find a facilitative way to unstick it.
Yeah. So harmony is like, trying to cultivate harmony and peace. But I think I was cursed because in that armed conflict, I immediately saw the futility of it. So I moved up with Ken Wilber's thing of growing up. I went from ethnocentric to world-centric. The Beatles, it's like world peace, right? Whereas two protracted communities are fighting each other, right and wrong, ethnocentric. You go up a level and you realise, hang on, we're one country, we're one world, and then you go up, keep going up the levels. So I was left with that, but that nearly got me killed on quite a few occasions because you can't really be that person because we're at war with each other. But as a value, I think we can all get along. If you take two sides, often they both have the same needs. I need your people to stop killing my people, and I need your people to stop killing my people. So how have you been managing that for the last 10 years? Oh, we've been killing each other's people. So that's the tragic strategy to meet the need of, we want you to stop killing us, sort of thing. So I am very sensitive to disharmony. Not that I can't handle conflict, but I think it is possible to resolve conflict. It's often, unattended to trauma.
The amazing thing, of course, is what happened in Ireland. There was some resolution, and I had the honour or pleasure of meeting with Lord John Alderdice.
Oh yeah.
Who engineered a lot of that, and he is the sort of person that really could do what you were talking about.
Yeah.
You know, negotiate with both sides, and see each other's point of view and get them to see the other person's point of view, the other side's point of view, etc., etc.
Yeah. Clever guy. And a psychiatrist.
I think one thing I thought you conveyed really well was how if you die before the date of your death, if you really go into those experiences and grapple with it and integrate it and digest it, when you do reach the end, it can be a peaceful experience or state, it seems like to me. So I think you conveyed kind of the energetic, just the way your paper was kind of ordered, I thought. So thank you.
Thank you. I think at the very least, you'll have a good death if you're lucky enough to be conscious. You know, if you follow it all out, if you forget about the wider stuff just as a practice, you know, I think you could have a good death. It's an interesting story. I didn't have time to put it in, but there was a period in my life where I had been in Amsterdam, and I came back from Amsterdam and I thought I was having a heart attack. It was in my early 30s. So I went to hospital, and they take it really seriously. You're in, they're putting the beepers on you and all this stuff, and sitting there. So I was sitting on the thing thinking, shit, I'm gonna die, and my life is just terrible. This is just a terrible time to die. My work-life balance is wrong. Everything's wrong. And then they came out and went, "You've pulled a muscle, probably smoking weed. Right? Get out here, take 2 Nurofen and get out." But then about 10 years later, I was managing director of an ad agency then, right? But 10 years later, I just left a spiritual community, and I had a cough, and typical thing, I didn't do anything about it, and it went into like serious life-threatening pneumonia. Went to the doctor, went hospital, in a hospital bed. I was in so much physical pain on the first night, I couldn't get into bed, but I could sit with time. I could sit in a state of presence and sit with time and just watch the clock, and I felt if I die now, I'm at complete and utter peace, you know. And I think that contrast is a very important one, because I think if you take anything from this, I would say working towards a good death is a very good thing. Because you don't want to cling.
Yeah.
So just say the Buddhists are right? That the idea is as your body and ordinary consciousness dissolves, you're in an open, expansive spaciousness. If you've done the preparation for that, if you haven't, it's like, I need to grab, you know.
Yeah.
And then the next stage you're confronted with sort of dream-like karma, so you would have, you know, nightmares of your experience, and if you over-identify or you have an aversion, then it's gonna. So there's a whole training in that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's an interesting how many people we read about and also know personally who found out they had a terminal cancer, and the doctors just say it's hopeless. You've got maybe so long, you know, and well, they can't accept that. I mean, thinking Steve McQueen, you know, the actor, went through that. He went to Mexico, you know, there were some people there that claimed they could do it. He spent the rest of his days frantically searching for somebody that could cure it, and of course nobody could. He died. And what an awful way to die, it seems like. What do you think of that? Should people do that, or you think they should just accept it?
Well, I think, you know, I went back to the, you know, work of Joan Halifax and Croft. I mean, they have such rich data from working with the dying on LSD and all the experiences through it. I think our society's regressed a bit. If you think of the amount of money that's spent on end of life care. Whereas if actually, and people get heavily medicated at the point of death, so
with opiates.
yeah, where actually I would, when asked to meet the dying, I would try and cultivate awareness of the present. And so I think that you're not accepting if you're going up and down. It's totally understandable, but what does it say about if you love life, you love death. So you're kind of inseparable. But I wouldn't judge,
Well, no, obviously that's something each of us has to deal with alone.
I have a question about your own personal journey. I would say your discourse for me was a description of what I would call the ascent. And then besides the ascent, there's the descent. And I am thinking like ascension could be going from the first chakra to the seventh chakra. The descent would be to come back from the seventh chakra back down to the first chakra. And in that vein, I have a fantasy. What if we had 1,000 Christs and 1,000 Buddhas in the world now? What would the world be like? And why can't we join that group to volunteer? So have you thought about the descent? Another way of putting it would be you have bodhisattvas. If you can't be a Buddha, you can be a bodhisattva certainly. And if you can't be a deity, you can be a saint. And it's not that hard to apply.
Yeah.
So have you thought about that on your own journey, about your steps to carry the light into the world?
Yeah, I feel I can't leave really while there's still suffering, as much as I'd like to leave.
No, he said carrying your light into the world. Not leaving. Yeah.
That's what bodhisattvas do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's what I mean.
Back to
Bodhisattva
earth.
can't leave, can you?
No, not going to heaven, bringing heaven back to earth.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, this is very personal, but I guess it's very hard to put this into words. My most profound, deepest, overwhelming experiences have been, this is it. Isn't it perfect? But yet there is suffering that needs attended to, but in terms of the search for it somewhere, oh my goodness, it's right here, right now. Like if you experience it, it's like, wow, right? It's so simple and right in front of your nose. But I think you can't, nor can you enjoy that when there's suffering in the world, and I think it needs attended to. I'm not sure whether that's answering your question.
No, it doesn't.
Do you want to put it another way?
Yeah. Who do you admire in the spiritual hierarchy, and why not be like Mike? People want to be like Michael Jordan. Why not be like Rinpoche?
Yeah, so I like to really put my money on people who are long dead. So there's nothing more to come out. I mean, I don't know whether you're aware the number of great teachers. I mean, I've worked with people who are completely traumatized by what the Buddhist teacher has done. Great, like Sogyal Rinpoche would be an example.
He's seeing you.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're not taking it in. We are all seeing you. You have so much, and he's saying, I see you and you can do this in your way, in your time, and this, I feel it. I feel it. And you're going, brushing it off, and you're just not hearing what he's saying.
Do you know what the concept of a bodhisattva is?
Yes.
Okay, that's what
You're
are.
already doing
you are
it.
a bodhisattva.
Okay. You're already doing
It's just
it.
what you're saying right here in front of me. You're doing
Yeah.
it, and
We're seeing it.
yeah,
Got it.
and so
we're,
Thank you.
yeah.
and so admire that rather than all those other teachers.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Humility is great.
I'm slow but pleasing, apparently. Was that?
Yeah.
Yeah. They hear what I am trying to say.
Yeah. Well, you're
No
saying
need
it.
for false humility, because that's a drag and an anchor too. know, so not pride, but not false humility is the middle way.
And you live that middle way. Did we see it?
That's why that's why this conversation's happening, is because you've already got it.
Yeah.
And you've been through hell. You've lived through it. And that's why you're
We
sitting
talked
there.
about last time.
Yeah.
You have so much grace.
Wisdom, grace, grace, compassion, true
Generous.
compassion. I mean, your quote from Pema Chodron are, it's you. You're the compassionate person that sees others as equals. Completely, not people you have to fix.
Got
You
it.
doing okay with that?
Yeah. Start to sweat.
And again, this sense of generosity, that using, sharing your own personal story and linking it with the teaching that you offered today, but it's really through your own story. And that's why I could say you've been through hell, because you've shared that with us, and you've metabolized that. And that's what allows you to be present and to be compassionate and not be fake in that, to be really real, to bring that.
And another analogy is shamans. I mean, this is how shamans, that they have hellish first third of their lives in order to be real. And shamans have this mythology that every year they take their heart out, hold it out, and let the buzzards pick it to death so they can throw a new one.
That feels like. Yes.
You know that feeling? Yeah.
Well, should we, what do you think?
I have to say
You have a
something.
comment?
I don't really have any thoughts necessarily, except that the experience that I had of that whole journey you just took us on, of zooming in, hearing about the details of your upbringing and your experiences, and then I would leave, and I would be like, I'm remembering times when I was on a mountain somewhere in Montana where there's no light, and just looking at the universe or the solar system or the galaxy, and having this like, whoa, mind-blowing experience, whether I was tripping or not. And then like leading me through like death, all the memories, the Beatles and assassination of John Lennon, I remember the exact moment. So walking us or me through a grieving process, we're re-grieving, and the deaths and the grief or the pain of that, the loss of all that follows us through. So like this 3-level experience I was having of you and of your, I don't know what to call that, some epic story you just wove for us. But really I just wanted to say how much it's meant to me to know you these past 2 years. And this is one of the many reasons why. Like I felt so close to you online.
Yeah.
We were on Zoom for 2 fucking years, and then I met you in Asilomar. I drove down just to see you and to see John and to see Nina, but she was indisposed. And now to be here with you.
There was actually
Wonderful.
a funny story, on I think it was like the day before John Lennon died. I was going to school and there was a little bird on the ground, and I think it had broken its legs. And I'm like, ah! So I like grabbed the bird and ran the whole way home. I was like really sad about this little bird, its broken legs, and my mum took it across the road to this guy who was like a dentist or something, and he tried to make a little sling, for it, where you could put it in, and I think it was like either the same day or the day before they said to me, I'm sorry, the bird died, so it was like a double hit of grief, the little bird, and there was something really symbolic about it too.
That's right.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
That's right.
Take these broken wings and learn to fly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry, one last thing. The other story Mike didn't. I told Mike this, and just sort of said, but when I was writing that, and I went, oh shit, he died on the 17th of July, the same time as and I sort of looked out the corner of my eye, and I just looked at the corner, and there was a stag, on the hill,
Oh, wow.
and it was like a moment of, whoa, this is really, like.
By the way, I missed that twice. The same date as what?
So the translator of Tibetan Book of Dai,
Okay.
died on the start of this retreat,
Okay.
many years ago, and also it was published on Lang's birthday.
That's a very weird thing for you to look at.
Well, no, I didn't.
You don't remember?
When he died, yeah. Well, I was reading a lot, researching a lot.
Very much like
Died there. That's when we start.
all the themes of that. It's like it just, as long as you keep it on.
Michael, thank you.